He was the one you called when you wanted to remember the good times. Birthdays, anniversaries, weddings. Joseph Shymansk was always there. Behind the camera, not in front of it. Capturing life in its cleanest light. Quiet. Focused. Almost invisible. The way good photographers are. He never wanted the spotlight. He only wanted the shot. And when you saw the pictures he took, you saw a man who loved the details. Not just smiles, but moments between them. Not just faces, but feelings. He was the kind of person who noticed what others missed. Until someone noticed him. And then everything changed. It wasn't the way he was found that shocked people, though that alone would haunt seasoned officers for years. It was the way everything before it made no sense. There were no warnings, no phone calls, no arguments, no debts, no threats. At least none anyone could prove. At 6:42 p.m. on a warm Thursday in August, Joseph Shymansk stopped replying to texts. 2 hours later, his car was found empty, parked neatly on the shoulder of a gravel road no one had a reason to use. And 3 days after that, the search ended. What was left of him couldn't fill a coffin. This wasn't a random act. The wounds weren't rushed. Whoever did this took their time. And yet when investigators tried to piece it together, his movements, his relationships, even the last photo on his camera, the trail bent in ways that felt engineered, just off enough to feel like the truth was somewhere just beyond reach. Friends described him as gentle, loyal, boring even. No enemies, no secrets. But records said otherwise. There were gaps, deleted files, a private drive no one could access, and a phone number in his call log no one claimed. The people closest to him were saying the same words over and over again. This doesn't make any sense. But the truth, it rarely does at first. This is the story of Joseph Shymansk, a story told in fragments, some recovered, others erased. A story people stopped asking questions about far too soon. You're watching Exposure, the Shymansk tapes. Stay with us. Joseph Shymansk was 38 years old, a name known across his small town not because he sought attention, but because he had a way of making others shine. He was born and raised just outside of the city, a place where everyone knew your story, or at least thought they did. From a young age, Joseph found solace in the quiet click of a shutter. Photography wasn't just a job to him, it was a language, a way to connect, to capture what couldn't be put into words. For more than a decade, he worked as a local photographer, specializing in weddings, community events, and the small celebrations that made life feel whole. He was the steady presence behind countless smiles, the quiet man who somehow made every moment look effortless. To his wife, Rachel, he was so much more than the man with the camera. A devoted husband, a loving father of 2 young children, their anchors and their joy. He was the kind of father who would build forts in the living room, who knew the exact way to calm a toddler's tears with just a look, a soft word. His friends remember a man who was kind beyond reason, reliable to a fault, gentle in his manner, and fiercely protective of those he loved. But beneath that calm surface was a complexity that few glimpsed, the kind of layers that don't always show in photographs or family dinners.
Cut to voiceover of Rachel, gently emotional. Joseph was my rock. He had this way of making you feel like you were the most important person in the room. But sometimes, even when he was right next to me, I felt like I didn't really know him. Cut to a close friend's voice, somber, reflective. He was the last person I'd imagined caught up in anything messy. But there were things Joseph didn't say, things he carried with him. Cut to a testimonial from a client, upbeat but sincere. He made our wedding day feel like a dream. Always calm, always encouraging. He made us feel seen. The photographs Joseph left behind tell one story, of joy, of light, of ordinary moments made extraordinary. But the silence around his final days tells another, a story stitched with questions no one was ready to answer. He had secrets. Small ones, maybe, but enough to shift how those closest to him would remember the man who was, until that day, simply Joseph. What was Joseph hiding, and who did it protect? As we uncover the life behind the lens, one thing becomes clear. Joseph Shymansk was more than a photographer. He was a man with a past, and a truth that would change everything. What do you think really happened? Comment. Banili. Subscribe to Banili. Share with someone you trust. It began, as these things often do, with something small. A quiet nudge in the routines of a place that rarely changed. The kind of neighborhood where trash bins roll to the curb like clockwork, where porches are swept clean before the sun even hits the shingles, where everyone knows which car belongs in which driveway. So when Mrs. Ellen Moretti, who lived 2 houses down, stepped out one morning and caught a foul stench cutting through the morning chill, thick, metallic, clinging to the back of her throat, she paused. She scanned the air like a bird sensing a storm. It was stronger than compost, heavier than sewage. Wrong. And it was coming from the O'Neill's end of the street. Joseph O'Neill hadn't been seen in days. That in itself didn't mean much. He was quiet, kept to himself, retired early, kept odd hours. But his mailbox had filled to the brim. Newspapers stacked, yellowing. Porch lights left on all day. The kind of details that neighbors notice but hesitate to act on until the smell made hesitation impossible. It was Joseph's niece who finally called it in. She hadn't heard from him since Sunday. It was now Thursday. At 3:47 p.m., officers Diaz and Marin arrived to perform a welfare check. No answer. They circled the property, peering into windows, tapping on glass. What they saw through the back door froze them in place. The blinds were drawn, but just enough light slashed through to illuminate a trail. A single red smear, dragging along the kitchen floor, almost dry. The door was forced. The officers entered cautiously, radios ready, hands twitching near their belts. What they found wasn't a body. It was pieces. In the detached garage, tucked behind boxes of rusted tools and unopened holiday decorations, they discovered several black plastic bags, thick, taped at the seams. The smell was strongest here. The concrete beneath them was wet. Inside, human remains, dismembered, carefully wrapped in painter's tarps, some parts still frozen, others left to thaw. But the garage was too clean, too managed. Forensics would later report a strange detail. Very little blood, not enough to account for what had been done. And so began a deeper inspection of the house, room by room, cabinet by cabinet, closet by closet. In the bathroom, behind the shower curtain, faint droplets of blood, diluted as though recently scrubbed. In the living room, a small brown stain on the underside of the carpet, invisible unless you knew to lift it. And in the guest room, the mattress had been flipped, but when removed entirely, a dark pool soaked through to the box spring. There was something else. The body had been cut with precision. No hesitation marks, clean incisions, possibly made post-mortem. The medical examiner suggested the use of a bone saw, maybe even surgical tools. This wasn't done in panic. It wasn't improvised. It was methodical. But neighbors said Joseph was alone. No visitors, no strange vehicles, nothing out of the ordinary. And yet here he was, in fragments, in bags, in a garage that showed no signs of a struggle.
A statement from Officer Diaz, recorded shortly after the discovery. I've walked into bad scenes before, but this one, it didn't feel fresh. It felt staged, like someone wanted us to find it, like they wanted us to ask the wrong questions. So many things didn't add up. There were no fingerprints, no foreign DNA, no signs of forced entry, aside from the police. But the biggest question came as the evidence began to map out the crime scene. Because if Joseph O'Neill died in that garage, why was there blood in 3 other rooms? It's the silence that begins to swell first, the kind that settles in long after the police tape goes up and reporters have moved on, after the flashing lights vanish, after the neighbors stop whispering. The kind of silence that makes you question what you missed the first time you walked past the house. Joseph O'Neill hadn't planned to disappear. That's what made this harder. 4 days before his body was found, he had booked a session with a client, a portrait shoot, a regular gig, one he'd done dozens of times before. Her name was Clarissa Mead. She'd been waiting for him outside the botanical gardens at 9 a.m. He never showed. No cancellation, no excuse, no answer. The woman waited nearly 30 minutes before sending a text, then a second, then a call. Voicemail. At first she chalked it up to a personal emergency. But Joseph's studio line was also silent. By nightfall, she'd already forgotten the missed appointment. She wasn't the only one trying to reach him. His wife, Elena, estranged but still in touch, had left 2 voicemails that same afternoon. One was short. Just checking in. Call me when you get a sec. The second, 5 hours later, was different. I don't know what's going on. Joe, I need you to call me back. He never did. The police began to piece together the last days of his life by fragments. Card transactions, phone pings, camera timestamps. But Joseph's usual rhythm had broken. He hadn't answered a single message since Sunday night. And then another discovery. Quiet, but crucial. Joseph's main camera bag was missing. His studio gear, gone. No trace of it in the house, or garage, or car. The DSLR he always carried. The memory cards. The backup hard drive he never left behind. Gone. His laptop was also missing. A desktop computer in the study had been left powered off, but when booted up by digital forensics, its recent history had been wiped. Entire folders emptied. No notes, no edits, no cached files. No trace of any sessions from the past 2 weeks. And then there was the ring. Joseph never took it off, even after the separation. Elena had said so herself. But when his body was found, his wedding band was missing. There were no signs of robbery, no drawers rifled through, no valuables touched. Nothing was stolen. Except his life, and one critical piece of evidence. The camera. The thing he spent most of his waking hours using, recording, documenting. The thing that, according to friends, he had described as his second memory. The police canvassed the neighborhood, house to house, door to door. No one had seen anything unusual. No visitors, no strange vehicles, no noise, no struggle. But one neighbor across the alleyway mentioned something odd. A porch light, left on at 3:12 a.m. Tuesday morning. Bright, flickering. She noticed it only because her cat had knocked something off the windowsill and jolted her awake. She remembered seeing a silhouette on the side of Joseph's house. A tall figure. Still. Watching something. She told herself it must have been nothing.
The camera footage from that night could have confirmed it. But Joseph's surveillance system had been disabled, intentionally. Power cut at the junction box, wires clipped clean. The police issued a public statement that same afternoon. A missing persons bulletin was upgraded. They asked for tips. Anything. Any clue that might help trace his final movements. We're looking into associates, clients, past sessions. We're asking anyone who had contact with Mr. O'Neill in the last 7 days to come forward. No one did. Until one woman appeared at the station. She wasn't there to help. She was there to file a complaint because someone had contacted her using Joseph's business email 3 days after he died. What do you think really happened? Comment, subscribe, share with someone you trust. Every investigation begins with the body, but what comes next is never about the body. It's about what it left behind, the paper trail, the digital fingerprints, the bruised memories and fractured perceptions, the unfinished conversations that shift from ordinary to incriminating the moment a life is cut short. Joseph O'Neill's life had always appeared composed, still, like the portraits he took, calculated, clean, unflinching. But when the police stepped behind the lens, the frame widened, and the picture began to blur. His wife, Elena, hadn't lived in the home for over a year. The separation was quiet, private. They told friends it was mutual. No arguments, no animosity. But in her official statement, Elena said something strange. Joseph was different that last month, distracted, like he was bracing for something. When asked what that might have been, she hesitated, then said, I think someone was trying to hurt him, but I don't think he told me everything. That was the first crack. The second came from an anonymous tip. A woman called in to report a man she believed had been stalking her, a former client of Joseph's. She said she'd seen his name in the news and wanted police to be aware of something. 3 months earlier, she'd filed a complaint with a local gallery. She accused Joseph of misconduct during a private photo shoot. No charges were ever filed. But her account painted a very different image of the man behind the camera. She claimed he crossed boundaries, suggested poses that made her uncomfortable, pressed when she refused. She didn't touch me, she'd written in the original statement, but he wanted to. I could feel it. Her story was met with skepticism at the time, but now it added weight. Police brought her in for questioning. She hadn't seen Joseph since that day. She deleted his contact, blocked his email. But what troubled investigators was a single detail she recalled. He had a new assistant, a guy, tall, quiet, didn't talk much, watched everything. There was no record of a registered assistant in Joseph's business license. But 1 week later, police traced a recurring name on expense reports. Adrian Hale, a freelance editor, listed in several payments from Joseph's accounts under vague labels: consulting, technical support, processing. Adrian had no criminal history, no flagged incidents. But when they knocked on the door of his listed address, he was gone. Neighbors said he moved out 3 days earlier, in a hurry, left behind furniture, took only a backpack and a hard drive. Bank records showed recent withdrawals, cash only, large amounts. And Joseph's missing laptop? Never recovered. But a login attempt had been made on a public Wi-Fi network in Bakersfield, California, 300 miles away. It was traced back to a device registered under Adrian Hale's name. But Hale wasn't the only one investigators were circling.
There was the business partner, Reed Thorne, an old friend turned occasional collaborator. He had helped Joseph launch his online store years ago. They'd split earnings from photography books and branded workshops. But recently, the profits had dried up, and Reed had sent a string of agitated emails demanding reimbursement. The last one, dated 12 days before Joseph's disappearance, read, "You made promises. I made investments. If I don't see the money, I will show up." He denied any involvement, claimed he hadn't spoken to Joseph in person for months, provided a time-stamped alibi, but he never denied the anger. He was evasive. Things were falling apart, and he didn't want to admit it. And then, finally, there was something else, something small but stubborn. A neighbor reported seeing a man walking toward Joseph's property around midnight the Sunday before the body was discovered. Not a stranger, someone she'd seen before, someone who'd visited once or twice the previous year. Described only as well-dressed, maybe in his 40s, knew exactly where he was going. She remembered him because he always parked far from the house, like he didn't want to be noticed. Police showed her a photo lineup. She pointed to one man. He wasn't a client, he wasn't a friend, and he wasn't listed in any of Joseph's known contacts. His name has been withheld from public release, but investigators believe he may be the reason Joseph's marriage ended. As the police dug deeper, so did the secrets, and Joseph's picture-perfect life began to crack. It was a still frame that changed everything. 4 weeks into the investigation, leads were cooling. Suspects faded into their own alibis. Theories began to loop in circles. But a routine check of nearby surveillance, ignored at first for its poor visibility, produced one unexpected frame. A grainy image, pulled from a rusted street-facing camera behind an auto shop 2 blocks from Joseph's home. Timestamp, Monday, 2:47 a.m., the night before the body was discovered. In it, barely visible, a man walks briskly across the far edge of the frame, hooded, gloved, his right hand holding something long, wrapped in cloth. The footage was nearly discarded, until a sharp eye in the department noticed something else. In the man's left hand, a strap, a padded shoulder strap hanging low, the exact model Joseph used for his camera bag. The man disappears behind a fence. He never returns on the footage. But investigators used the direction he came from, paired with doorbell cams and traffic cameras, to map his path in reverse. And it led them to one place: a pawn shop. Larkin's Cash and Trade, a worn-down storefront just off Fremont, known for electronics, known for silence. The owner said nothing at first. No memory of a camera dropped off, no receipt. But when investigators subpoenaed recent transactions, one entry stood out: a Canon EOS R5 with a cracked lens hood. Serial number matched to Joseph's registered gear. Sold 3 days after his death. The man who pawned it used a fake name, but he left something behind: a fingerprint, partial but viable, on the memory card. It was cross-referenced with state employment records and came back with a match: Adrian Hale. The assistant, the one who had vanished, the one who had been paid under vague descriptions, never formally employed. The one who knew Joseph's habits, his routines, his passwords. He was located 5 days later, sleeping in the back of an abandoned photography studio in Stockton. He didn't run, he didn't fight. He just said, "I didn't mean for it to go that far." In the interview room, the story began to unspool. Hale claimed Joseph owed him thousands, promised him creative credit on a gallery exhibit, said the files on the missing laptop were his, concepts, designs, editing presets, his intellectual property. When Joseph refused to split the earnings, Hale said he lost everything: weeks of unpaid work, months of designs. He said it was theft. The tools used to dismember the body, found in Joseph's garage, bore one clear fingerprint on the handle of a reciprocating saw: Adrian's. But it was Joseph's camera that delivered the final blow. Recovered from evidence, investigators found something buried deep in the card's memory: a corrupted video file, out of sequence, hidden behind unlabeled folders. When recovered and enhanced, it showed a quiet frame. A room, Joseph's guest bedroom. And in the corner, visible for only a few seconds, his reflection, catching his own camera in a mirror, setting up for a session. But he wasn't alone. Standing beside him, frozen mid-turn, was Adrian Hale. Expression unreadable. Until the footage skipped. And in the next frame, less than 1 second later, Joseph was gone. And Adrian was holding the camera. That was all it showed.
But it was enough. The final clue came from a place Joseph loved most, his camera. It had recorded something the killer never intended anyone to see. The arrest made headlines. So did the charge, second-degree murder. The prosecution argued intent. The defense argued loss of control. A heated argument, a shove, an accident, they said. A man pushed too far. But the body had been cut apart, deliberately, methodically. The jury didn't see an accident. They saw planning. The trial lasted 11 days. This wasn't rage, the prosecutor told the court. It was resentment. It was revenge. Adrian Hale never showed emotion. Not during testimony, not during sentencing. His only words were to Joseph's family. I was loyal. He betrayed me. The judge handed down the sentence, 31 years to life. No possibility of parole for at least 24. Cameras were allowed in the courtroom for the verdict. Elena sat in the second row. She did not cry. This doesn't bring him back, she said. It just stops someone else from disappearing the same way. Public reaction was immediate. Local news stations ran features on freelance labor, unpaid creatives, forgotten contractors. Social media flooded with think pieces. Some sympathized with Hale, most did not. Joseph's images were used in memorial slideshows, soft portraits, sunlight in empty rooms, faces staring straight into the lens. But in every image, people said the same thing. He always made others feel seen, and no one saw it coming. Justice was delivered. But for the Shymansk family, peace may never be. What do you think really happened? Comment, subscribe, share with someone you trust. There are stories we tell ourselves to feel safe. Stories about neighbors, friends, family. Stories that convince us we know the people in our lives. That if danger were close, we'd sense it. That there would be signs. A change in tone, a shift in routine, a shadow passing across the light. But some truths are so ordinary, so quiet, so deeply stitched into the fabric of daily life, we miss them entirely. Joseph Shymansk made a career out of seeing what others overlooked. A smile just before it breaks. A touch held for one extra second. The soft tension in a room before something is said. His lens was trained on beauty. His instinct was timing. He knew how to find the moment, capture it, preserve it. And yet, the most crucial moment of his life, no one saw. Not his clients, not his friends, not even the woman who once shared his bed. The case is closed. The sentence has been delivered. But what remains?
The footage from his camera told us how it ended, but it never told us why. Why he let Adrian so far in, why the debts were hidden, why he kept the affair from everyone, if it even was an affair, why he stopped answering calls in his final week, why, for a man who captured the truth in others, he buried so much of his own. And there's one more question, one that Joseph's daughter Mia asked through tears during her first and only interview. Did he know? In that last second, did he know it was going to happen? There was no answer, only silence, only absence. Because the final moments of a life aren't always loud. They don't always look like we expect. Sometimes they happen on an ordinary Monday, in a room no one checks, with a person no one suspected, over a grudge no one believed was real. And sometimes they're caught by the very thing that made you feel most alive, a camera. He spent his life helping others capture their best moments, but no one could have imagined his last moments would be his most tragic. If this story struck a chord, share it. Comment below. What do you think was the real motive? And if you've ever trusted someone you shouldn't have, you're not alone.